On my first day working at the new defense base, I saw a framed photo of my husband sitting proudly on a female coworker's desk. Holding back my shock, I calmly asked her who the handsome man in the picture was. She smiled happily, flashed a massive diamond ring, and replied that he was her fiancé, who worked at the Pentagon. My name is Maya Jackson. I am 34 years old and a senior financial auditor for a major defense contractor. Instead of throwing a fit or tearing up that office, I used my security clearance to dig into every lie my husband had ever told. Before I reveal how I dismantled his entire life and sent him to federal prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is always served legally and brutally cold. I had worked my entire life to secure my position as a senior auditor. The corporate world is not kind to African American women who do not constantly prove they are the smartest people in the room. I had sacrificed holidays, weekends, and endless family gatherings to climb the corporate ladder, bearing the weight of financial expectations from everyone around me. My husband Marcus, who was 36 and a procurement consultant for the Department of Defense, always claimed he understood the grind. We had been married for 6 years. He was smooth, charismatic, and always dressed in tailored suits that I helped pay for early in his career when he was just starting out. I thought we were building an empire together. I thought we were a power couple breaking generational curses and building real wealth. My transfer to the new Air Force Base was supposed to be a major professional milestone for us. I was assigned to audit the Procurement and Vendor Relations Department. On my very first morning, I decided to take a quiet walk through the floor to get a read on the staff. The office was an open floor plan buzzing with government contractors and military personnel. That is when I saw her. Her name was Chloe. She was 28, young blonde and completely oblivious to the real world. Her cubicle was decorated with fairy lights and expensive floral arrangements that seemed completely out of place in a secure military facility. But the flowers were not what caught my attention. Sitting right next to her dual monitors was a heavy silver picture frame. Inside that frame was a high-resolution photograph of Marcus. My Marcus. He was wearing the custom navy blue suit I had bought him for our 5th wedding anniversary. His arm was wrapped tightly around Chloe's waist, and they were laughing on a luxury boat, the exact same boat I had supposedly rented for his guy's trip to Miami last summer. The air left my lungs. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath my designer heels. A normal woman might have screamed. A normal wife might have picked up that silver frame and smashed it across the desk. But I am an auditor. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies, tracking hidden assets, and letting criminals talk themselves into a corner. I took a slow, deep breath, locked my emotions in a heavy mental vault, and painted on a polite corporate smile. I walked directly up to her desk. I introduced myself as the new senior financial auditor, conducting preliminary compliance checks. Chloe immediately sat up straight, eager to impress the new boss. She had no idea she was looking at the woman who shared a mortgage and a bed with her supposed soulmate. I complimented her organized workspace, keeping my voice smooth and conversational. Then I pointed at the photograph. I told her it was a lovely picture and casually asked who the lucky guy was. Chloe absolutely beamed. Her face lit up with the kind of naive joy that made me want to be sick. She told me his name was Marcus, and that he was a high-level consultant at the Pentagon. She leaned in close as if sharing a corporate secret, and whispered that he was highly classified and frequently went on dangerous deployments. Classified deployments. That was what he called his weekend trips away from me. I kept my smile frozen in place and nodded, pretending to be fascinated. Then she lifted her left hand to tuck a piece of blonde hair behind her ear. A massive princess-cut diamond caught the harsh fluorescent lighting of the office. It was easily 3 carats, blindingly clear and incredibly expensive. I let out a soft gasp, playing the role of the impressed coworker perfectly. I told her that ring was breathtaking and asked if they had set a date. Chloe practically vibrated with excitement. She told me Marcus had proposed 2 months ago during his deployment to Paris. I mentally cross-referenced that date. 2 months ago, Marcus told me he was locked in a secure briefing facility in Virginia for a week with no cell service. Chloe could not stop talking. She told me they were planning a lavish winter wedding in Aspen, Colorado. She proudly stated they had already booked a luxury ski resort for the entire bridal party. I asked her when the big day was, feigning excitement for her upcoming nuptials. She gave me the exact dates for the second week of December. I did not blink. I did not flinch. Those were the exact dates Marcus had recently blocked off on our shared digital calendar for a mandatory federal training conference. I leaned casually against the edge of her cubicle, fully stepping into my interrogation tactic. I told her she was so young to be settling down and asked how they managed such an extravagant wedding with his demanding government schedule. Chloe laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She said Marcus was an amazing provider. She boasted that he had just purchased a gorgeous $2 million luxury condo for them in the Navy Yard district so she could be closer to her favorite yoga studio. A luxury condo in the Navy Yard. The pieces of the puzzle began clicking together with brutal clarity. Just 6 months prior, Marcus had come to me, claiming a major real estate investment he managed had gone temporarily under. He said his personal savings were tied up in litigation. I had stepped up without question, taking over the entirety of our household expenses, our mortgage, our car payments, and our insurance premiums. I had been paying for our entire life, so he could use his government salary to buy real estate and diamonds for a 28-year-old coworker. I asked Chloe if they had moved in together yet. She pouted slightly and said Marcus still had to maintain a secondary residence near his base for security protocol, but he spent 4 nights a week at their new condo. 4 nights a week. The nights he claimed he was working late at the Pentagon drafting procurement contracts. I had heard enough. Every word out of her mouth was another nail in my husband's coffin. I pushed myself off her desk, smoothing the front of my pencil skirt. I thanked Chloe for her time and told her I looked forward to working closely with her in the procurement department. She smiled brightly, thanking me, and saying she hoped I would meet Marcus at the upcoming company holiday party. I looked her dead in the eye and promised her that I would absolutely be seeing Marcus very soon. I walked away from her desk with slow, measured steps. I did not look back. My heart was pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was completely clear. I walked straight into my new corner office, closed the heavy glass door, and locked it. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for women who felt powerless. I was not powerless. I was the senior financial auditor for a defense contractor, and I now knew my husband was running a shadow life that required massive amounts of capital. Capital he did not legitimately have. I sat down at my desk, opened my encrypted laptop, and prepared to follow the money. Marcus thought he was the smartest man in Washington. He thought he could exploit my dedication to my career while draining our resources to fund his fantasy life. But he made one fatal mistake. He left a paper trail, and he left it right in my jurisdiction. I drove home that evening with a dangerous kind of clarity. The entire commute through the Virginia traffic was spent building a mental firewall around my heart. I knew exactly what I was walking into. Marcus and I had a long-standing tradition of Sunday dinner. It was a cultural staple we brought from our respective childhoods, a dedicated time to reconnect before the corporate grind of the week began. Usually I looked forward to the smell of soul food filling our house, the warmth of the kitchen, and the illusion of our perfect partnership. Today, that illusion was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. When I unlocked the front door of our luxury suburban home, the rich aroma of smothered chicken, baked macaroni and cheese, and collard greens hit me immediately. The house was spotless. Soft jazz played through the surround sound speakers. Marcus was standing at the kitchen island wearing a pristine white apron over a fitted black Henley. He looked like the cover of a magazine celebrating successful black excellence. He looked like a man who had absolutely nothing to hide. He turned around when he heard my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. A bright, dazzling smile spread across his face, the exact same smile I had fallen in love with 6 years ago. He walked over, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed me deeply. I forced my body to relax into his embrace. I let my hands rest on his broad shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of the man who had just bought a $2 million condo for a 28-year-old blonde woman. He poured me a generous glass of expensive red wine and handed it to me. He asked how my first week at the new base was wrapping up and if the transition to the executive auditing team was everything I wanted. His voice was smooth like butter laced with what sounded like genuine pride and affection. I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the dark liquid coat my throat. I looked right into his eyes and told him it was definitely an eye-opening experience. I said the procurement department was full of surprises and that I was learning a lot about how things operated behind closed doors. Marcus did not flinch. He just chuckled, turned back to the stove, and began stirring the gravy. He told me the government sector was a mess of red tape and warned me not to work myself to the bone fixing their broken systems. Then he had the absolute audacity to sigh heavily and complain about his own week. He spun a fabricated tale about intense meetings at the Pentagon high-level security briefings and the exhausting burden of managing classified vendor contracts. He played the part of the weary, dedicated provider flawlessly. If I had not seen that photograph on Chloe's desk, I would have walked up behind him and massaged his shoulders, feeling guilty for my own corporate success. We sat down at the formal dining table. The food tasted like ashes in my mouth, but I chewed carefully, swallowed, and smiled. I needed to test the waters. I needed to see how he reacted when pushed out of his comfort zone. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands, and adopted a tone of casual excitement. I told him that since my promotion came with a significant salary bump, I was thinking we should expand our real estate portfolio. I watched his face closely as I dropped the bait. I said I had been reading up on emerging property markets and thought a luxury condo in the Navy Yard district would be a brilliant investment. I specifically noted that it was a great area for young professionals and could bring in massive rental income. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His fork hovered an inch above his plate. His jaw tightened and the warmth completely vanished from his eyes. It was a micro-expression, a tiny glitch in his performance, but to an auditor, it was a glaring red flag. He quickly recovered, putting his fork down and wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. Then he executed a psychological maneuver I had seen him use 100 times before. He flipped the script. He did not answer the question about the real estate. Instead, he attacked my character. His voice dropped an octave, taking on a tone of patronizing disappointment. He asked me why I could never just be satisfied with what we had. He accused me of bringing my ruthless corporate energy into our home and treating our marriage like a business acquisition. He said we were sitting down for a peaceful Sunday dinner, and here I was obsessed with money, investments, and more work. I sat back in my chair, keeping my expression perfectly neutral as he escalated. He leaned across the table, using his physical presence to dominate the space. He told me that my ambition was becoming a problem. He said I was constantly trying to micromanage his role as the head of the household, and that my need to control our finances was emasculating. He invoked the heavy cultural guilt of the ambitious black woman, accusing me of caring more about climbing the corporate ladder than nurturing our marriage. He said he was breaking his back at the Pentagon to build a solid foundation for our future family, and my constant push for more wealth made him feel like he was never enough for me. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was attempting to make me feel guilty, greedy, and emotionally absent, all to deflect from a simple question about buying property. He wanted me to apologize. He wanted me to shrink myself, soothe his fragile ego, and drop the subject entirely. I gave him exactly what he wanted. I lowered my gaze, adopting a posture of contrition. I reached out and gently touched his hand. I apologized softly. I told him he was right, that I was letting the stress of my new position bleed into our personal time. I praised how hard he worked for us and promised to leave the financial planning alone so we could just enjoy our evening together. The tension left his body instantly. His ego was satisfied. He had successfully manipulated his successful, high-earning wife into submission, reinforcing his delusion that he was the smartest person in the room. He smiled condescendingly, squeezed my hand, and told me he loved me. He said he just wanted us to be happy and that I needed to trust him to handle the big picture. After dinner, he kissed my forehead and announced he was going to take a long shower to wash off the stress of the week. The moment I heard the bathroom door click shut and the heavy spray of the shower turn on, the subservient wife vanished. I moved with silent, calculated precision. I went straight to my home office and booted up my personal computer. I pulled out my encrypted security key and accessed our banking portals. I needed to know the exact extent of the financial damage. A $2 million condo in the Navy Yard and a massive 3-carat diamond ring required serious capital. Even with creative financing, the down payments alone would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I logged into our joint savings accounts, our shared investment portfolios, and the personal accounts of his that I still had access to. I braced myself for the devastating reality of seeing our life savings wiped out. The screens loaded. I stared at the numbers. I refreshed the pages, thinking there must be a system error. I checked the transaction history for the past 6 months, filtering for large withdrawals, wire transfers, or liquidated assets. Nothing. The money was all there. Our savings were completely untouched. His government salary deposits were consistent and accounted for. There were no hidden loans taken out against our primary residence. Every single dollar we had built together was exactly where it was supposed to be. I sat back in my leather office chair, my blood running colder than ice. This was not a moment of relief. This was the moment the situation upgraded from a marital betrayal to a catastrophic legal nightmare. If Marcus had not drained our accounts, if his legal government salary was untouched, then the math was screaming a terrifying truth. A government procurement consultant does not have millions of dollars in untraceable liquid cash just lying around. He was buying luxury real estate and premium diamonds for a mistress without touching a dime of his own legitimate money. There was only one place a man in his position could get that kind of capital without triggering banking alerts. He was stealing it. Marcus was not just a cheating husband manipulating his wife. He was actively siphoning massive amounts of money from somewhere else. And given his role at the Department of Defense, I knew exactly what pool of money he had access to. The pieces of the puzzle locked into place, forming a picture so dark, it took my breath away. He was embezzling federal funds. He was running a sophisticated financial crime right under my nose, and I was going to follow every single bloody footprint he left behind. I did not sleep that night. While Marcus snored peacefully in our custom king-sized bed, dreaming of his blonde mistress and his stolen millions, I sat in the glow of my monitors and went to war. As a senior financial auditor, I had high-level security clearance and backdoor access to the vendor procurement databases for the defense contractor we both worked under. It is a massive bureaucratic labyrinth designed to confuse outsiders, but to me, it was a playground. I knew every loophole where dirty money could hide. I started with the wedding venue in Aspen and the $2 million condo in the Navy Yard. Real estate transactions leave massive footprints. You cannot just drop that kind of cash without a wire transfer, and wire transfers require routing numbers. I traced the title of the Navy Yard condo through public property records. It was registered to a limited liability company called Apex Consulting. Apex Consulting. The name was so painfully generic it practically screamed fraud. I cross-referenced that LLC with the Department of Defense vendor database. My heart hammered against my ribs as the search results populated on my screen. Apex Consulting was listed as an active approved vendor for military procurement logistics. And the federal employee who personally approved their vendor status and signed off on their monthly invoices was Marcus. He was not stealing large lump sums. He used the classic death by 1,000 cuts method. He set up Apex Consulting as a middleman for basic supply chain logistics. Whenever the base needed standard equipment, Marcus routed purchase orders through Apex. Apex bought equipment at wholesale prices, marked them up by 400%, and billed the government. Marcus then rubber-stamped the inflated invoices. The federal government paid the bill, the suppliers got their cut, and the massive profit margin washed into the Apex Consulting bank accounts. It was a textbook embezzlement scheme, clean and highly lucrative. He had been running it for over a year, pulling down hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in stolen taxpayer money. But an LLC requires a registered agent. It needs a living human being to sign incorporation papers, open commercial bank accounts, and act as the legal face of the company. Marcus was a federal employee with strict financial monitoring. He could never put his own name on those documents without triggering an immediate federal investigation. He needed a proxy with a clean background and enough greed to look the other way. I pulled up the state business registry for Apex Consulting. I paid the nominal fee to download the original articles of incorporation. I watched the PDF document render on my screen line by line. I scrolled past the generic business purpose, past the corporate address that was just a virtual mail drop in Delaware, down to the signature line for the registered principal agent. I stared at the name printed in stark black ink. I blinked, rubbed my tired eyes, and looked again. The name did not change. The signature was violently familiar. Bradley Thomas Miller. Brad. My lazy, entitled white brother-in-law. The man married to my older sister Chantel. My breath caught in my throat. A wave of physical nausea washed over me. This was no longer just a cheating husband stealing from the government. This was a conspiracy, and it had infected my own bloodline. Brad was a walking stereotype of failed ambition. He was a real estate broker who never actually sold houses. He spent his days watching sports and talking loudly about his various hustles that never materialized. He had married Chantel 8 years ago, seamlessly sliding into our African-American family dynamics by playing the cool white guy. But beneath the charm, he was a parasite. He and Chantel lived far beyond their means, constantly chasing the appearance of wealth to maintain Chantel's pristine image at our local church and within her social circles. I was the one who subsidized that image. For years, I had been paying the dreaded black tax. Whenever Brad's real estate deals fell through, Chantel came crying to me. I co-signed their loans and paid off their credit cards when debt collectors called. I funded their lifestyle because my mother constantly reminded me that family is everything, and as the successful daughter, it was my duty to uplift my sister. Looking at the federal fraud documents on my screen, the sickening reality set in. Brad was the frontman for Marcus and his embezzlement ring. Marcus used Brad's failing real estate credentials to legitimize the cash flow. Brad took the stolen federal funds, filtered them through fake property acquisitions, and handed the clean money back to Marcus. Marcus then used that washed money to buy luxury condos and diamond rings for his blonde mistress. It was a perfect loop of deception. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitors illuminating, tears of pure rage welling in my eyes. I had carried the financial weight of my family for a decade, sacrificing my peace to keep them afloat. All this time, Brad and Marcus were conspiring behind my back, hoarding millions in stolen federal funds, while letting me pay the mortgage on the house Brad slept. The betrayal was so absolute it transcended typical heartbreak. It was a structural dismantling of my entire reality. My husband was a criminal adulterer. My brother-in-law was a money launderer. The two men who sat at my dining table, ate my food, and smiled in my face were plotting my ruin. I slowly closed the laptop. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light through the blinds. I did not feel broken anymore. The shock had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, calculating machine. I needed to know exactly how much Chantel knew about all of this. I needed to know if my own sister was an unwitting victim of Brad's deception or a willing participant in my destruction. Fortunately, I would not have to wait long to find out. We had a mandatory family cookout scheduled for that very afternoon at Chantel and Brad's house. I stood up, smoothed my silk robe, and walked toward the bedroom to get dressed. I was going to attend that barbecue. I was going to eat their food, smile at their jokes, and look my treacherous family right in the eyes. The game changed, and I was about to become the most dangerous player on the board. Did this betrayal hit too close to home? If you have ever been the successful family member who everyone secretly took advantage of, you are not alone. Tell me your own stories in the comments below, and let me know if you would have confronted them right away or played the long game like I did. The drive to Chantel and Brad's house was an exercise in extreme emotional control. Their home sat at the end of a pristine cul-de-sac in a gated community, a sprawling 5-bedroom modern farmhouse that I had literally helped them secure. I pulled my car into the driveway, wedging it between Brad's brand new imported SUV and Chantel's luxury crossover. The sound of 90s R&B music thumped through the backyard speakers, mingling with the heavy, sweet scent of hickory smoke and barbecue sauce. It was a classic family cookout, the kind we had been throwing for decades, but today the atmosphere felt entirely different. It felt like walking onto a theater stage where every single actor was playing a twisted role at my expense. I walked through the side gate and stepped onto the massive flagstone patio. The backyard was packed with extended family, church members, and local friends. At the center of it all stood Brad. He was manning the oversized custom grill, holding a pair of stainless steel tongs like a scepter. He wore designer sunglasses and a smug, relaxed smile, playing the role of the generous, wealthy patriarch, providing for his diverse extended family. Marcus stood right beside him, holding a craft beer, laughing loudly at something Brad had just said. Seeing the two of them together, the corrupt government official and his proxy money launderer bonding over stolen federal funds, made a fresh wave of bile rise in my throat. I forced my posture to remain relaxed, pasting on a flawless, untouchable smile. I walked over and kissed Marcus on the cheek, playing the part of the devoted wife. He wrapped his free arm around me, squeezing my waist. Brad greeted me with a loud, obnoxious cheer, shouting to the yard that the real boss had finally arrived. Everyone laughed. It was a perfect, sickening performance. Chantel emerged from the house carrying a massive tray of seasoned ribs. My sister was in her element. She wore a flawless summer maxi dress, her hair styled to absolute perfection, projecting the image of a wealthy, unbothered homemaker. She set the tray down and immediately started delegating tasks to the younger cousins, acting as the ultimate hostess. Chantel had always been our mother's golden child. She was the one who was allowed to drop out of college to pursue her dreams of becoming an influencer, the one who married a white man, who supposedly brought diversity and charm to our family gatherings. I was the dark-skinned, serious sister who studied finance, worked corporate hours, and paid the bills when Chantel's dreams inevitably failed to pay the rent. Chantel walked over to me, kissing the air next to my cheek to avoid smudging her makeup. She looked me up and down, offering a passive-aggressive compliment about how my sensible clothes were so practical for my stressful job. I thanked her, my voice smooth and devoid of any irritation. I looked around her expansive backyard, complimenting the new landscaping and the expensive outdoor furniture they had recently installed. Chantel beamed proudly, boasting that Brad had just closed a massive commercial real estate deal. She said his business was finally getting the recognition it deserved. She had no idea I knew that the commercial real estate deal was actually a fraudulent shell company funneling stolen military logistics funds. Or maybe she did know. That was the question burning in my mind as I watched her preen and boast. Before I could probe further, my mother commanded the attention of the patio. She was sitting in the prime shaded seating area, holding court among the older church ladies with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She called me over with a sharp wave of her manicured hand. I walked over and took a seat on the edge of a nearby lounge chair. My mother did not ask how my first week at the new military base had gone. She did not ask about my health or my well-being. Instead, she immediately directed the conversation toward Brad and Marcus, making sure everyone in earshot could hear her boasting. She praised Brad loudly, telling the church ladies how the Lord had truly blessed his real estate ventures this year. She talked about how wonderful it was to see a man step up and provide such a beautiful life for his family. Then, right on cue, she turned her critical gaze on me. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by a tone of sharp maternal correction. She looked at my posture, my plain clothes, and the tired lines around my eyes. She told me I needed to learn a lesson from Chantel about how to be a softer woman. She said that while it was nice that I had a good job, a woman's true wealth was keeping her husband happy. She raised her voice slightly, ensuring Marcus and Brad could hear her from the grill. She warned me that I was letting my corporate ambition make me hard and controlling. She said men like Marcus, successful, handsome men, needed peace at home, not a wife who acted like an auditor in her own kitchen. She told me I needed to stop working so much, stop obsessing over bank accounts, and start focusing on nurturing my marriage before Marcus found someone else who would. The sheer audacity of her words struck me like a physical blow. Here was my own biological mother sitting on expensive patio furniture paid for by my exhausted credit, elevating a lazy money launderer, and telling me I needed to be a better wife to a man who was actively draining federal funds to buy a $2 million condo for a blonde coworker. She was demanding I shrink myself to protect the fragile ego of a thief. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend my lifelong dedication to our family. I simply sat there and let her ignorant, cruel words wash completely over me. I looked directly into her eyes, my gaze so cold and sharp that she momentarily faltered, her self-righteous smile dropping for a tiny fraction of a second. I absorbed the blatant disrespect, storing it in the dark vault of my mind with everything else I had discovered this week. I smiled a terrifying smile, thanked her for the wisdom, and excused myself to get a drink from the kitchen inside. I needed to get away from the crowd before I lost my composure entirely. Walking into the house felt like crossing a threshold into a new reality. The air conditioning inside Chantel's house was a sharp contrast to the humid heat of the backyard patio. The noise of the party became a muffled hum as I walked down the long hallway toward the expansive chef's kitchen. I needed a glass of ice water and a moment to steady my racing heart. I moved silently, my flat sandals making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. The hallway turned sharply into the kitchen, and as I approached the corner, I heard voices. Angry, hushed voices. I stopped immediately, pressing my back flat against the cool wall just out of sight. It was Marcus and Chantel. They must have slipped inside through the sliding glass doors while I was dealing with my mother's toxic lecture. Marcus sounded furious, his voice a harsh, desperate whisper. He was demanding to know why Brad was getting reckless with the transfers. He said Brad had moved $40,000 into a personal account instead of routing it through the agreed shell company structure. Marcus told Chantel that the new auditing team at the base was aggressive and that any sloppy movement of funds could trigger an internal review. He said he could not protect Brad if the federal investigators started looking closely at the secondary accounts. Chantel did not sound intimidated. In fact, she sounded utterly dismissive, laughing a low, cruel laugh that made my stomach turn. She told Marcus to lower his voice and stop acting like a panicked amateur. She said Brad took the extra $40,000 because they needed to clear a massive credit card bill before the end of the month to secure financing for a new vacation property they were eyeing. She reminded Marcus that he was not the only one who had expensive tastes to maintain. Then she dropped the bomb that completely shattered my remaining sanity. Chantel told Marcus that he had a lot of nerve complaining about a $40,000 transfer when he had just spent $50,000 on a diamond ring for Chloe. I stopped breathing. The hallway seemed to spin around me. Chantel knew her name. My own sister knew the name of my husband's mistress. She did not just know about the affair, she knew the specific financial details of his secret life. Marcus hissed at her to shut up, warning her that I was right outside and could walk in at any moment. Chantel scoffed loudly. She said I was probably too busy getting lectured by our mother to notice anything. She told Marcus he was lucky she and Brad were the ones handling his dirty money. She said anyone else would have blown his cover a year ago when Chloe first started showing up at his office events. A year ago, they had known for an entire year. While I was working 80-hour weeks paying my sister's debts and supporting my husband's career, they were all laughing behind my back. Chantel's voice dripped with pure malice as she continued. She told Marcus he owed them that extra $40,000 for keeping his secret. She called it an inconvenience fee for having to cover for him whenever he claimed he was on a classified deployment, but was actually vacationing with his blonde side piece. She reminded him that she was the one who had to lie to my face when I called her crying last Thanksgiving, because Marcus had supposedly been called away on an emergency assignment. The memories hit me like physical blows. I remembered that Thanksgiving. I remembered sitting alone in our house, devastated that my husband was missing the holiday for national security reasons. I had called my sister for comfort. Chantel had listened to me cry, offered me fake sympathy, and told me I needed to be strong and supportive of his important work. All the while she knew he was carving a turkey with Chloe. Marcus growled, telling Chantel she was pushing her luck. He reminded her that without his federal contracts, Brad would be back to selling used cars, and she would be back to begging me for rent money. He said they were mutually assured destruction, and she needed to keep Brad in line before they all went to federal prison. Chantel was completely unfazed by the threat. Her arrogance was staggering. She stepped closer to him, her voice dripping with venomous confidence. She told Marcus he was not in a position to give orders. She reminded him that she was the one who had helped him pick out the princess-cut diamond for Chloe. She said he would have bought something cheap and tacky if she had not intervened. She boasted that she had even advised him on the best neighborhoods for the secret condo because she understood the real estate market better than he did. My sister had helped my husband select an engagement ring for his mistress using stolen money that I was auditing. The depth of the betrayal was so profound, it bordered on the surreal. It was an intricate web of deceit designed to extract maximum financial benefit from my hard work, while simultaneously humiliating me at every turn. Chantel finished her vicious tirade by explicitly laying out the terms of their extortion. She told Marcus that as long as the money kept flowing into Brad's accounts, his secret was safe. She said they were all getting rich off the government, and he needed to relax and enjoy the ride. She warned him never to threaten her again, reminding him that she could destroy his entire life with a single phone call to me. Marcus let out a long, ragged sigh, the sound of a man completely trapped by his own corruption. He told her fine, but demanded that Brad stick to the agreed transfer schedule going forward. He said the new senior financial auditor at the base was ruthless, and he could not afford any red flags on his vendor invoices. He had no idea that the ruthless senior financial auditor was standing 10 feet away, recording the entire conversation on her encrypted smartphone. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my hand gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I had hit record the moment I heard Marcus mention the $40,000 transfer. I had captured every word: the admission of federal embezzlement, the extortion, the confirmation of the affair, the absolute unvarnished truth of their conspiracy. I did not confront them. I did not storm into the kitchen and scream. I silently backed away, retreating down the hallway toward the front door. I slipped out of the house unseen, the heavy wooden door clicking softly shut behind me. I walked to my car, my mind racing with cold, brilliant clarity. I had walked into that cookout as a victim of infidelity. I was walking out as the architect of their total destruction. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the heavy doors sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary away from the suffocating heat of the barbecue. The muffled bass of the music still vibrated through the tinted windows, a rhythmic reminder of the celebration happening just yards away. My breathing was shallow and uneven. I stared blindly at the pristine dashboard, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, making my entire body vibrate. I needed to be absolutely certain my phone had captured everything. I unlocked the screen, my fingers stiff and robotic, and pressed play on the audio file I had just recorded. The voices of my husband and my sister filled the silent cabin of my car, crystal clear and devastatingly cruel. I fast-forwarded to the final moments of their exchange, the specific part I had walked away from, to physically escape the suffocating reality of her house. Marcus was pleading with her to be reasonable, begging her to understand the heat he was under from the new auditing protocols. But Chantel was relentless. Her voice, captured perfectly by the microphone, dropped all pretense of familial loyalty and shifted into pure, unadulterated extortion. She told Marcus that she did not care about federal audits or his stress levels. She explicitly stated that her luxury mortgage payment was due next Friday, the exact mortgage I had co-signed to secure their inflated lifestyle. She said he was going to wire the funds to Brad's account by Wednesday morning without fail. If the money did not clear, she promised she would march straight to my office at the base and drop the entire truth right on my desk. She threatened to expose the Aspen wedding, the $2 million condo, and the blonde mistress before the weekend was over. She said he was paying for her silence, and the price of that silence was keeping her house out of foreclosure. The sheer audacity of her threat echoed in the confined space of my vehicle, making the air feel heavy. She was holding a loaded gun to his head using my money. I paused the recording. The silence in the car was deafening. I looked down at my hands resting on the steering wheel. My fists were clenched so tightly that my knuckles were completely white. I watched almost detached as my perfectly manicured nails dug deeper and deeper into the soft flesh of my palms. I pressed harder, channeling every ounce of betrayal, humiliation, and fury into that physical grip. A sharp, stinging pain flared, followed by a warm trickle. A dark drop of blood welled up from the broken skin, sliding down my palm and staining the expensive beige leather of the steering wheel. I did not wipe it away. I let it bleed. I needed to feel the physical sting to anchor myself to the reality of what was happening right now. The pain was the perfect metaphor for my entire existence within this profoundly toxic family structure forever. For over a decade, I had been bleeding out for them. I had been paying the ultimate black tax. It is an unspoken rule in our community, a suffocating cultural expectation, that the one who makes it out, the one who secures the high-paying corporate job and breaks the cycle of generational poverty, must turn around and carry the entire family on her back. I had worn that heavy burden like a badge of honor. I believed my mother's relentless sermons about how family is everything. I believed that my financial success was not truly mine, but a shared community resource meant to uplift my sister, provide for my parents, and validate our standing in the church. But this was not an uplift. This was a systematic, calculated extraction. They had weaponized my deep loyalty and turned my hard-earned success into their personal slush fund. They wanted everything. My mother had just sat on a patio I helped pay for, mocking my dedication to my career while praising the very men who were robbing me blind. She had demanded I shrink my ambition to protect the fragile ego of a man who was using stolen government funds to finance a secret life with a 28-year-old coworker. She had programmed me to be the perfect, compliant financial host. And Chantel, my beautiful, entitled, deeply toxic sister. She was not just a passive beneficiary of my hard work. She was an active predator. She had looked me in the eyes, hugged me, and accepted my money to pay off her debts, while simultaneously orchestrating my absolute ruin. She had helped my husband select a princess-cut diamond for another woman. She negotiated the terms of his infidelity and priced her silence at the cost of the mortgage. The mortgage I was legally liable for. They had structured their entire extortion scheme around the financial safety net I had generously provided. The realization was profound and horrifying. I was not a beloved daughter or a cherished sister. I was simply an automated teller machine. I was a utility to them. They viewed my corporate success not with pride, but with ravenous entitlement. They felt completely justified in tearing me down emotionally while draining me financially. They believed I existed solely to facilitate their lifestyle. They assumed I would simply absorb the abuse, keep my head down, and keep writing the checks, because that is exactly what strong Black women are supposed to do. We are supposed to endure. We are supposed to pray about it, forgive, and keep the family together at all costs. I stared at the drop of blood slowly drying on the leather steering wheel. The woman who had driven to this barbecue, the dutiful daughter, and the supportive wife, died right there in the driver's seat. She was gone, entirely erased by the sheer magnitude of their deception. The woman who remained was cold, sharp, and absolutely terrifying. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out a silk handkerchief. I calmly wiped the blood from my palms and meticulously cleaned the steering wheel. I wrapped the stained silk around my hand, applying pressure to the cuts, and started the engine. The low hum of the car filled the space, a grounding mechanical sound. I was not going to cry. I was not going to break down or demand explanations. Explanations were for people who still sought closure. I did not want closure. I wanted absolute, undeniable ruin. They thought they had outsmarted me. Marcus thought his federal position and his smooth-talking charm made him untouchable. Chantel thought her extortion scheme was foolproof because she held the ultimate trump card of his infidelity. Brad thought his white privilege and real estate licenses shielded him from scrutiny. My mother thought her matriarchal authority gave her the absolute right to strictly dictate my own worth. They were all completely wrong. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the sound of the barbecue and the toxic illusion of my family behind. The weekend passed in a blur of meticulous preparation. I did not confront Marcus when he finally came home that Sunday evening. I played the part of the tired, overworked wife to perfection, offering brief, non-committal responses while he talked about how relaxing the cookout had been. I watched him move around our kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water, utterly blind to the fact that I held the keys to his absolute destruction. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, pulled my hair back into a sleek, unforgiving bun, and drove straight into the heart of the financial district. I was not heading to the defense base just yet. My first order of business was severing the financial parasite that was my sister. I walked into the gleaming glass tower that housed my personal legal team and banking representatives. 5 years ago, when Chantel and Brad wanted to buy their dream home in that gated community, their credit scores were abysmal. Brad had a history of defaulted loans, and Chantel had maxed out her credit cards, trying to maintain the lifestyle of an internet influencer. My mother had wept in my living room, begging me to help them, weaponizing my success against me. She claimed that a rising tide lifts all boats and that I owed it to the family to secure their housing. Against my better judgment, I had stepped in. But I was an auditor, not a fool. I did not simply co-sign a traditional bank loan and leave myself entirely vulnerable to their financial incompetence. I structured the transaction through a private wealth management trust. My trust purchased the property outright, and I essentially acted as the private lender for Chantel and Brad. They signed a strict promissory note directly with my entity. The deed of trust listed my holding company as the absolute lien holder. For years, I had allowed them extreme leniency. Whenever Brad's supposed real estate deals fell through and they missed their monthly payments, I quietly covered the deficit out of my own pocket. I granted them endless forbearance agreements, absorbing the financial blow to keep the peace in the family and keep my mother off my back. That leniency ended today. I stepped into the mahogany-paneled conference room where my lead wealth management attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, was already waiting with the portfolio. She stood up, greeting me with a firm handshake, and directed me to the seat at the head of the heavy glass table. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told her I needed to activate the acceleration clause on the property occupied by Chantel and Brad immediately. Sarah opened the thick file, her eyes scanning the payment history we both already knew by heart. She adjusted her glasses and noted that the occupants were currently 4 months in arrears on their formal payment schedule. She reminded me that we had previously issued internal grace periods at my direct request. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that all grace periods were permanently revoked. I instructed her to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings before noon. Sarah leaned forward, her professional demeanor shifting into a cautious posture. She reminded me that activating the acceleration clause meant demanding the entire remaining balance of the loan immediately. Given their documented financial history, she pointed out that they would have zero capacity to secure refinancing or produce that kind of capital on short notice. She warned me that initiating the foreclosure without a standard warning letter would result in a hard, aggressive legal strike. The property would be seized, and they would be facing immediate eviction within the legal minimum time frame. She asked if I was absolutely certain I wanted to proceed with the maximum penalty allowed under the contract, knowing they were my relatives. I felt a cold, satisfying calm wash over my body. I thought about the conversation I had recorded in that hallway. I thought about Chantel demanding $40,000 of stolen federal money from my husband to pay the very mortgage we were discussing. I thought about my sister helping my husband buy a diamond ring for his mistress and laughing about my supposed ignorance. They had used the safety net I provided as a staging ground for my destruction. I told Sarah that I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. I explained that the occupants were no longer considered family, They were defaulting debtors who had flagrantly violated the terms of our agreement, and they were to be treated with the exact same ruthless efficiency as any other hostile entity. I demanded that the notice of default be drafted, filed with the county clerk, and served to them with zero advance warning. I wanted the legal courier to walk up the driveway of that pristine modern farmhouse and hand them the harsh reality of their situation. Sarah did not ask any further questions. She recognized the absolute finality in my voice. She pulled a pristine stack of legal documents from the folder and placed them directly in front of me. She handed me a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. I stared down at the crisp white paper. This was the exact mechanism of the black tax quantified and materialized in legal ink. For generations, successful black professionals have been dragged back down by the suffocating expectation that we must endlessly fund the reckless choices of our relatives. We are taught to endure financial abuse in the name of familial loyalty. We are conditioned to smile through the exploitation, to write the checks, and to swallow our resentment, so the family image remains intact at Sunday service. I uncapped the pen. I was breaking that cycle right here, right now. I was tearing up the unwritten contract that said my success belonged to everyone else. I pressed the nib of the pen against the signature line. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. I signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes authorizing the absolute financial ruin of the sister who had betrayed me. I signed the second page authorizing the immediate freeze of all connected lines of credit I had previously extended to them. I signed the third page finalizing the legal mandate that would strip them of their fraudulent wealth and leave them exposed to the harsh reality of their own incompetence. The physical act of signing those papers felt like a massive suffocating weight being lifted directly off my chest. I placed the pen back on the table. The silence in the conference room was heavy, but it was a victorious silence. Sarah gathered the documents, tapping the edges against the glass table to align them perfectly. She promised me that the foreclosure notice would be filed with the county courts within the hour, and that the process server would deliver the documents to Chantel and Brad by tomorrow morning. There would be no phone calls from my legal team, no offers to negotiate, and absolutely no way out. I thanked Sarah for her swift execution and stood up from the table. The first phase of my retaliation was officially in motion. Chantel and Brad were about to lose their biggest bargaining chip. They thought they could hold their mortgage over Marcus's head to extort stolen federal funds, but they could not extort money to pay a mortgage that had already been aggressively called in and foreclosed by the true owner. I had just checkmated my sister without her even realizing the game had begun. I walked out of the law firm and stepped back into the bright morning sunlight of the city. I unlocked my car and sat behind the wheel. The financial execution of my sister was deeply satisfying, but it was merely a warm-up exercise. I checked the time on the dashboard clock. It was barely 9 in the morning. I started the engine and merged back into the heavy flow of traffic, pointing my car toward the defense base. It was time to deal with the federal embezzlement scheme. They had played a dangerous game with classified vendor contracts, and they had arrogantly assumed I would never look closely at the ledgers. It was time to gather the absolute, undeniable proof that Marcus and Brad were stealing from the United States government without any hesitation. I drove through the bustling city streets with a newly ignited, terrifying sense of unwavering purpose to execute my final decisive plan. The trap was set for my sister, and the federal snare was about to snap shut on my husband. I cleared the heavy steel gates of the military security checkpoint just before 10 o'clock in the morning. The armed guards waved me through with a crisp, respectful nod, completely unaware that the sharply dressed woman returning their greeting was about to detonate a massive financial bomb deep inside their procurement division. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the main executive building, my heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic precision against the polished concrete floor. The bustling noise of government contractors, military personnel, and administrative staff faded into a dull, white noise in the background. I navigated the sprawling maze of cubicles, intentionally taking the long, circuitous route that bypassed Chloe's desk entirely. I did not need to see her bubbly, naive face today. I did not need to see the stolen diamond flashing on her finger. I needed absolute unfiltered silence and razor-sharp focus. I swiped my encrypted security badge to enter the restricted executive corridor, walked straight into my corner office, and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I closed the motorized blinds, shutting out the rest of the department and isolating myself in a cocoon of quiet authority. I sat down at my workstation, docked my heavily secured government laptop, and inserted my multi-factor authentication token. The official seal of the Department of Defense flashed across my dual monitors, granting me unrestricted access to the deepest, most heavily guarded financial archives of the federal government. It was time to hunt. I pulled up the central procurement ledger and immediately isolated every single purchase order connected to Marcus over the past 24 months. The system churned for a moment before generating a massive spreadsheet containing thousands of complex line items. To a normal person, it looked like an impenetrable wall of meaningless alphanumeric codes and confusing bureaucratic jargon. To an experienced senior auditor, it was a perfectly illuminated roadmap of corporate treason. I cross-referenced his specific employee authorization codes with the vendor identification number for Apex Consulting. The screen blinked, filtering out all the irrelevant noise and revealing the raw, undeniable truth of his corruption. Marcus had authorized exactly 42 separate federal contracts to Brad's shell company. I studied the progression of the fraud. The initial contracts were small and cautious, testing the waters with minor logistics requests for basic office equipment and standard-based supplies. But as time went on and their confidence grew, the amounts escalated exponentially. He had moved from paperclips to signing off on high-level tactical supply contracts, funneling hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars per quarter directly into Apex Consulting. I clicked into the individual invoice records to examine their methodology. Marcus and Brad were not even trying to be sophisticated about their theft. Their arrogance had made them incredibly sloppy. Brad would submit an invoice for specialized military-grade communication servers, charging $50,000 a single unit. I pulled the actual manufacturer pricing data from a parallel database. The real wholesale cost for those specific servers was barely $8,000. Marcus would blindly approve the massively inflated invoice. The federal treasury would dutifully release the funds to Apex, and Brad would pocket the $42,000 difference on a single line item. They repeated this process across dozens of different supply categories. It was textbook wire fraud, criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and gross embezzlement, all wrapped up in a tidy digital bow. But proving they overcharged the federal government was only half the battle. I needed to prove exactly where the stolen money went after it hit Brad's accounts. I needed the undeniable concrete link between Brad's fraudulent corporate entities and Marcus's secret luxury lifestyle. I accessed the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network database, utilizing my highest-level senior clearance to run a deep, comprehensive background trace on every financial movement associated with Apex Consulting. The banking records populated instantly, painting a damning picture of their money laundering operation. Brad was transferring the stolen federal funds from the primary Apex corporate account into a secondary hidden holding trust. From that shadowy trust, the money fractured into dozens of different directions designed to confuse standard banking algorithms. I meticulously tracked the routing numbers, my eyes darting across the bright screens as I mapped the toxic financial bloodline. The evidence was staggering. There was the massive wire transfer for the initial down payment on the $2 million Navy Yard condo, cleanly routed through a fake real estate holding company. There was the $50,000 payment to the high-end boutique jeweler in Georgetown for Chloe's princess cut engagement ring, categorized falsely as a corporate consulting expense. There was the $40,000 transfer Chantel had aggressively demanded just yesterday to cover their impending mortgage default. I documented every single transaction with ruthless efficiency. I downloaded the official bank statements, the specific IP addresses used to authorize the illicit transfers, and the digital signatures linking both Marcus and Brad directly to the fraudulent accounts. I compiled the raw data into a comprehensive color-coded timeline, matching Marcus's fake classified deployment dates with the exact dates he and Chloe were swiping his illicitly funded credit cards at luxury ski resorts in Aspen. I spent 5 grueling hours meticulously building the federal case. I did not take a lunch break. I did not answer my phone when it buzzed with incoming messages from my mother. I worked with the cold mechanical precision of an executioner slowly sharpening a blade. I created a master investigative dossier, organizing the overwhelming evidence into clear, indisputable categories. Section 1 detailed the systemic procurement fraud, complete with the original inflated invoices and Marcus's digital authorization signatures. Section 2 comprehensively mapped the money laundering operation, explicitly linking Brad's shell company to the fraudulent trust account and tracking the exact flow of the stolen cash. Section 3 exposed the personal enrichment, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the stolen federal funds were directly used to purchase luxury real estate and expensive jewelry for a civilian coworker. This was no longer a messy emotional divorce proceeding, where a cheating husband could simply hide his assets, hire a slick lawyer, and argue over alimony payments. This was a massive federal indictment waiting to happen. The legal penalties for defrauding the Department of Defense are catastrophic and absolute. They were looking at mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison, complete and total asset forfeiture, and absolute public ruin. I connected a secure encrypted flash drive to my terminal and downloaded the entire massive dossier. I printed a hard copy of the executive summary, the harsh black ink laying out the definitive, undeniable end of my husband's life as a free man. I slid the thick stack of papers into a heavy red folder, sealing it with a confidential classification sticker. I sat back and stared at the red folder resting on my immaculate mahogany desk. My breathing was steady and completely controlled. The weight of the federal statutes I had just documented carried devastating consequences. Marcus would be stripped of his government pension entirely. He would lose his security clearance, his freedom, and his dignity. Brad would instantly lose his real estate broker license and face simultaneous prosecution for money laundering and tax evasion. The federal government does not negotiate with thieves who steal from military budgets. They annihilate them. The family conflict had officially escalated into a federal crime, and I held the undeniable proof right in my hands, ready to destroy them all. I locked the red folder safely inside my leather briefcase. The metallic snap of the brass clasps echoed sharply in the quiet isolation of my office, a definitive sound marking the end of my husband's freedom. I let my hands rest on the smooth leather surface for a long moment, feeling the undeniable weight of the power I now possessed. The adrenaline that had fueled my frantic investigation was slowly subsiding, replaced by a cold, absolute certainty. I had the weapon. I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the sprawling procurement department. The tinted glass allowed me to see everything outside without anyone being able to look in. It was a perfect vantage point for a predator. I scanned the sea of cubicles until my eyes locked onto her. Chloe was sitting at her desk, blissfully unaware of the catastrophic legal storm gathering right inside my office. She was typing rapidly on her keyboard, occasionally pausing to admire the massive 3-carat diamond ring weighing down her left hand. The very ring bought with funds stolen from the military budget I was hired to audit. She looked so young, so arrogant, so completely insulated by her own profound ignorance. Suddenly, my personal cell phone buzzed against the mahogany surface of my desk. The vibration broke the heavy silence of the room. I turned away from the window and walked back to my workstation. I picked up the device, expecting to see another panicked text message from Chantel or another gaslighting attempt from my mother regarding the foreclosure notice that was currently making its way to their front door. Instead, the notification displayed an unfamiliar number. I unlocked the screen and opened the message app. The text was surprisingly long-crafted, with the kind of passive-aggressive corporate sweetness that young women often use when they are trying to mark their territory without sounding overtly hostile. The message read, "Hi Maya, this is Chloe from the procurement department. I know we just met this morning and I am so excited to work under your leadership. I just wanted to reach out woman to woman. I noticed you asking a lot of questions about Marcus today. I know he is incredibly handsome and successful, and working in this environment can sometimes blur professional lines. Marcus is my fiancé, and we are deeply committed to building our future together. I hope we can keep our working relationship strictly professional going forward. See you at the holiday party." I stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone, reading the words twice to ensure my tired eyes were not playing tricks on me. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this 28-year-old subordinate was genuinely breathtaking. She had tracked down my personal cell phone number, likely pulling it from the emergency contact registry in the Human Resources database, just to send me a territorial warning. She actually believed I was a lonely, inappropriate new boss trying to flirt with her handsome government consultant. She thought she was protecting her prize from a predatory older woman. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my lips, bouncing off the soundproof walls of my office. If the situation were not so deeply intertwined with federal embezzlement and my own shattered marriage, it would be a brilliant comedy. Chloe was fiercely guarding a man who was using her as a temporary distraction while stealing millions of dollars to fund a lifestyle she thought he had earned through hard work. She was warning the actual legal wife to stay away from her own husband. I walked back to the glass wall, looking down at her cubicle again. She was staring at her phone now, biting her lower lip, clearly waiting for my response. She thought she had just made a powerful, assertive power play. She believed she had put the intimidating new senior financial auditor in her place. I thought about the staggering irony of the black tax, the cultural burden I had carried for a decade. I had spent my entire adult life sacrificing my peace, paying off Chantel's debts, funding my mother's lifestyle, and financially propping up the very man Chloe was now claiming as her exclusive prize. Chloe did not have to pay the black tax. Chloe got the luxury ski trips to Aspen and the $2 million condo in the Navy Yard without ever having to co-sign a loan or endure a toxic Sunday dinner. She got the shiny, curated version of Marcus that my sweat and tears had financed. But that dynamic was over. The era of Maya Jackson funding the delusions of parasites was officially terminated. I looked down at the message again. The temptation to march out of my office, walk straight up to her fairy light-covered desk, and publicly obliterate her entire reality was strong. I could pull the marriage certificate from my purse and slam it down next to her stolen diamond. I could tell her that the man she was fiercely defending was looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I could watch her perfect, naive world crumble in real time in front of the entire department. But reacting emotionally is what my mother and Chantel expected of me. They always assumed I would eventually break under pressure, lose my professional composure, and act out like the bitter, angry woman they desperately wanted me to be. Emotional reactions leave messy, unpredictable collateral damage. I did not want a messy confrontation in the middle of a military base. I wanted a surgical, completely devastating execution. I needed Chloe to remain perfectly comfortable in her delusion. I needed her to keep planning her lavish winter wedding. I needed Marcus to continue believing that his embezzlement scheme was secure, and that his two separate lives were safely insulated from each other. The higher they climbed on their pedestal of stolen wealth and lies, the harder the impact would be when I finally kicked the foundation out from under them. I tapped the screen of my phone, bringing up the digital keyboard. I took my time, carefully crafting a response that was polite, professional, and dripping with a dark, terrifying double meaning that only I could truly appreciate. I typed with steady, deliberate keystrokes. I wrote, "Hi Chloe. I appreciate your transparency and your dedication to your fiancé. You have absolutely nothing to worry about regarding my intentions. I am solely focused on ensuring that every single asset in this department is properly accounted for. Please continue planning your beautiful future. Do not worry, you will soon have absolutely all of him." I read the message over one final time. It was the perfect psychological checkmate. To Chloe, it would read like a graceful retreat, a polite confirmation that the new boss was backing off and respecting her relationship. To me, it was a legally binding promise. She was indeed going to get all of him. She was going to get the disgraced bankrupt, federally indicted version of Marcus. She was going to inherit his massive legal bills, his shattered reputation, and the crushing reality of his absolute ruin. She wanted the prize, and I was going to wrap him up and hand him over right before the authorities dragged him away in handcuffs. I hit send. I stood by the window and watched her reaction in real time. Down in the procurement department, Chloe's phone lit up. She snatched it off her desk, her blonde hair falling over her shoulder as she quickly read my response. I saw her shoulders physically relax. A smug, victorious smile spread across her face. She practically preened in her ergonomic chair, completely convinced she had just successfully defended her territory against a high-powered executive. She immediately picked up her phone and started typing furiously, likely texting Marcus to brag about how she had just handled the new auditor. I turned away from the window, leaving her to her pathetic celebration. The warning from the mistress was not a threat. It was a confirmation of her profound vulnerability. She had tied her entire identity to a ghost, a financial illusion constructed by a thief. My phone vibrated one more time. I expected another text from Chloe gloating about her victory, but as I glanced down at the screen, a completely different notification popped up. A new email alert had just arrived, pushing the conflict into entirely new territory. The Human Resources automated system had just forwarded an official corporate invitation directly to my executive inbox. The email subject line was deceptively cheerful, adorned with a sparkling ring emoji that felt out of place in a secure military server environment. The sender was the Internal Human Resources Social Committee. I clicked the notification expecting a calendar invite for the upcoming holiday mixer. Instead, a lavishly designed digital envelope rendered across my dual monitors. The seal broke open, revealing a high-resolution engagement portrait of my husband and my subordinate. Marcus was looking down at Chloe, with that signature charming smile, the exact smile he used when he promised my mother he would protect her daughter. The text below formally invited the executive leadership team to celebrate the upcoming nuptials of Chloe Elizabeth Davis and Marcus James Carter. The event was scheduled for this Saturday night at the Grand Conservatory, an outrageously expensive private venue in the city. I leaned forward, tracing the immaculate details. Chloe had not sent this personally. She leveraged her connections within Human Resources to blast the invitation to the entire senior executive floor. She wanted to ensure every official at the defense base knew she was marrying a successful government consultant. It was a classic corporate power play disguised as social grace. She wanted to secure her status by parading her wealthy fiancé in front of her new senior financial auditor. The tragic irony of the situation settled over me. Marcus had spent months meticulously compartmentalizing his life. He built massive soundproof walls between his legitimate marriage and his fraudulent fantasy. He kept Chloe isolated from his real world, feeding her lies about classified deployments to explain his absences. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own superior intellect, that he never bothered to ask Chloe for the specific name of her new boss. He likely brushed off her complaints about the strict new auditor as trivial office gossip. He had no idea that the formidable executive Chloe was eager to impress was the exact woman whose credit score he exploited for years. He had no idea the woman he left at home every morning was currently holding his federal indictment in her locked briefcase. The sheer hubris required to pull off a double life of this magnitude had ultimately created the perfect blind spot. The universe was not just handing me an opportunity for revenge, it was laying out a red carpet. I stared at the RSVP button glowing at the bottom of the digital invitation. A weak woman would confront her husband at home, screaming and throwing the invitation in his face, giving him the opportunity to lie, manipulate, and destroy the evidence of his federal crimes. I was not weak. I clicked the button and accepted the invitation for one guest. The system generated an automated response notifying Chloe that the senior financial auditor would be attending her celebration. I could almost picture her down in the procurement department, practically vibrating with excitement, entirely oblivious to the absolute financial slaughter she had just invited into her life. The venue choice was a testament to their reckless arrogance. The Grand Conservatory required a massive $50,000 deposit just to secure the date. That was my money and federal money. That was the blood and sweat of my ancestors, completely liquidated to fund a champagne tower for a woman who thought she had won a prize. The rage inside me crystallized into something incredibly pure and sharp. This was no longer just about catching a cheating husband. This was about conducting a public, devastating audit of his entire existence. He wanted to play the role of the wealthy, benevolent provider in front of an audience of defense contractors. I was going to give him the biggest audience he had ever seen. I picked up my encrypted smartphone and dialed Sarah, my lead wealth management attorney. She answered on the second ring. I instructed her to fast-track the delivery of the foreclosure documents to my sister Chantel and her husband Brad. I wanted the legal courier to hand them the notice of default on Saturday afternoon, just hours before the engagement party. I wanted Chantel and Brad to be in a state of absolute blind panic. I knew exactly how my family operated under pressure. When the financial walls started closing in, they always ran to the closest source of money. If they thought their house was being seized, they would immediately hunt down Marcus to demand the extortion money he owed them. I was going to use their parasitic nature to orchestrate the perfect collision. Next, I drafted a confidential email to the Internal Investigative Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation utilizing a secure channel reserved for senior defense auditors reporting procurement fraud. I provided the primary shell company names, the vendor identification numbers, and a brief summary of the logistics pricing discrepancies. I flagged the communication with a priority marker, ensuring it would land on the desk of a senior federal agent by Friday morning. I noted that a comprehensive evidence file would be delivered directly to their field office on Monday. It was enough to prime the federal trap without tipping off Marcus or Brad. I spent the rest of the week operating with terrifying efficiency. At work, I was the perfect demanding executive, keeping the procurement team on edge while simultaneously burying the evidence of my investigation deep within secure servers. At home, I played the supportive, understanding wife. I cooked dinner. I asked Marcus about his stressful days at the Pentagon. I listened to his fabricated stories with a soft, encouraging smile. He was so completely absorbed in his own performance that he never noticed the absolute void behind my eyes. He told me he had to work late on Saturday to finalize a massive defense contract. I kissed his cheek, told him I was incredibly proud of his dedication, and said I would catch up on some reading. Friday evening, after Marcus left to ostensibly meet with government contractors, I drove to the most exclusive boutique in the city. I was not going to attend this execution in one of my sensible, conservative corporate suits. I needed armor. I needed a visual statement of absolute, undeniable power. I spent 3 hours with a private stylist until I found a floor-length tailored gown in a shade of red so deep and vibrant it looked like fresh blood. It fit me with lethal precision, projecting an aura of wealth dominance and unapologetic authority. I paired it with diamond drop earrings that I purchased myself years ago with my first executive bonus, a stark reminder of my own independent success. Saturday morning dawned cold and clear. By noon, the legal courier had officially served Chantel and Brad with the foreclosure notices, completely stripping away their financial safety net and leaving them exposed to the harsh reality of their impending eviction. By 2 o'clock, my phone was ringing incessantly, with panicked, desperate calls from my mother and my sister begging for an explanation. I ignored every one of them. Let them sweat. Let them feel the crushing, terrifying weight of the vulnerability they weaponized against me for a decade. The game was no longer being played by their rules. At 6 o'clock, I sat at my vanity mirror and applied a bold, dark red lipstick that perfectly matched my gown. My hair was styled in a sleek, elegant cascade down my back. I looked completely flawless, untouchable, and utterly lethal. I placed the heavily encrypted flash drive containing the entire federal embezzlement dossier into my designer clutch, right next to a certified copy of my marriage license. The invitation stated that the engagement party commenced at 7. I intended to arrive exactly on time, slipping into the crowded venue, just as Marcus took the stage to toast his new life. I walked out of my house, the heavy oak door locking securely behind me. The crisp evening air filled my lungs as I stepped toward my waiting car. I was finally and absolutely ready to burn his fragile stolen empire straight to the ground tonight. The drive through the illuminated city streets felt remarkably calm. I navigated the heavy evening traffic with the steady precision of a surgeon. The grand conservatory loomed ahead, a magnificent structure of glass and wrought iron. Valet attendants rushed to open the doors of imported luxury vehicles, welcoming a steady stream of military contractors and corporate executives. I handed the keys of my sedan to a young valet. I bypassed the crowd at the main entrance and presented my digital corporate invitation to the security coordinator. He scanned the barcode, his eyes darting to my title, and immediately stepped aside with a respectful nod. I crossed the threshold into the grand ballroom, and the sheer scale of the financial audacity hit me like a physical wave. The venue was transformed into a winter wonderland. Towering centerpieces of white orchids draped across dozens of silk-covered tables. A classical string quartet played softly from a raised balcony. Waitstaff circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of premium champagne. Every single detail, from the lighting to the custom ice sculptures by the bar, screamed of stolen extravagance. I audited the room as I walked. $10,000 in floral arrangements, $15,000 in catering, $20,000 in venue rental. My husband was throwing the event of the season using the tax dollars of the American public. I moved through the crowd with slow, deliberate grace. The blood-red silk of my tailored gown flowed beautifully, commanding immediate attention from everyone I passed. I was a vibrant, lethal splash of color in a sea of predictable black tuxedos and muted cocktail dresses. Heads turned, conversations paused. Colleagues from the procurement department nudged each other, whispering in hushed tones as the new senior financial auditor made her entrance. I acknowledged them with polite, terrifyingly brief smiles. I did not stop to chat. I maintained a direct, unwavering trajectory toward the center of the ballroom where the main stage had been erected. Chloe was holding court near the front of the room, surrounded by younger administrative assistants. She looked like a porcelain doll dipped in stolen wealth. She wore a sparkling white designer gown, a clear precursor to the lavish Aspen wedding she thought she was getting. She was laughing loudly, holding up her left hand so the overhead spotlights could catch the ridiculous 3-carat princess-cut diamond. She was practically vibrating with the thrill of her perceived victory, entirely convinced she had secured the ultimate prize. She was playing the role of the spoiled fiancé flawlessly. She had no idea she was actually standing in the epicenter of a massive federal crime scene. I stopped near the edge of the VIP seating area, positioning myself perfectly within the direct line of sight of the main podium. A waiter approached me with a tray of champagne. I took a crystal flute, holding it delicately by the stem, and waited. The string quartet finished their piece, and the ambient music faded into silence. The heavy velvet curtains behind the stage parted, and Marcus stepped into the spotlight. My husband looked magnificent. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo that I had personally picked up from the dry cleaners just 2 weeks ago. His hair was perfectly faded, his beard trimmed to absolute perfection. He radiated the smooth, magnetic charm that made him so effective at manipulating both government officials and vulnerable women. He took the microphone, tapping it lightly, and flashed his signature $1,000,000 smile at the crowd. The entire room fell silent, captivated by his effortless charisma. He began his speech with a smooth joke about how a busy government consultant finally managed to get tied down. The crowd laughed appreciatively. He spoke about his demanding career, dropping vague references to his classified work at the Pentagon and his dedication to national security. He played the part of the weary patriot finding his soft landing. He looked down at Chloe, his voice dropping into a register of manufactured affection. He called her his peace, his sanctuary, and the beautiful future he had been working so tirelessly to build. He lied with such fluid, terrifying ease that it genuinely took my breath away. He was not just a traitor to our marriage. He was a masterclass in sociopathic deception. I stood perfectly still, letting his lies wash over the crowd. I took a slow sip of my champagne, my eyes locked onto his face. I was waiting for the exact moment the illusion would shatter. Marcus raised his glass high into the air, signaling the crowd to join him in a toast. He projected his voice, asking everyone to raise their glasses to new beginnings, to absolute loyalty, and to building an empire based on trust. He swept his gaze across the room, smiling at his defense contractor friends, nodding at the procurement executives, and soaking in the adoration of his stolen audience. Then his eyes swept over the VIP section. His gaze slid past the muted cocktail dresses and the dark suits. His eyes caught the vibrant, unmistakable flash of my blood-red gown. The sweeping motion of his head stopped instantly. The charismatic, effortless smile froze completely on his face. His hand holding the crystal champagne flute high in the air began to tremble with a subtle, violent tremor. We locked eyes across the ballroom. The physical distance between us was perhaps 50 feet, but the psychological impact of our eye contact hit him like a freight train. I did not blink. I did not break my gaze. I stood with absolute terrifying stillness, holding my champagne flute with relaxed elegance. I offered him a small, razor-sharp smile that contained zero warmth. It was the smile of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel trap. I watched the blood drain rapidly from his face. The confident government consultant vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a panicked imposter who suddenly realized he was standing on a trap door. He looked at my vibrant red dress. He looked at my composed, lethal expression. He recognized the absolute certainty in my posture. He knew in that exact second that I was not there as a confused, grieving wife trying to save her marriage. He knew I was there as an executioner. The silence in the room stretched out, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. The crowd was waiting for him to finish his toast. Chloe was looking up at him, her smile faltering as she noticed his sudden, rigid paralysis. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat worked convulsively. He looked down at Chloe, then back up at me, his eyes wide with a frantic terror. He was rapidly calculating the variables, trying to figure out how I had found the venue and what I was about to do. He was desperately searching for a way out of the inescapable corner he had painted himself into. I slowly raised my crystal flute in a silent, mocking toast, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I tilted my head slightly, acknowledging his absolute panic. I wanted him to feel the crushing, suffocating weight of his impending destruction. I wanted him to stand on that stage surrounded by his stolen friends and his stolen fiancé and realize that every single thing he valued was about to be burned to the ground. The game he had played so arrogantly was officially over, and the house always wins. Marcus fumbled with the microphone. The harsh feedback whine echoed through the grand ballroom as he abruptly lowered his hand. He forced a strained, unnatural laugh that sounded like a choke. He leaned into the microphone, muttered a hasty excuse about needing a quick moment to handle a minor logistical issue with the venue staff, and stepped down from the raised platform. The crowd murmured in confusion. Chloe reached out to touch his arm, her brow furrowed in genuine concern, but he brushed past her without a single word. He moved through the sea of guests with aggressive, frantic strides. His eyes locked onto me with a terrifying mixture of absolute rage and desperate panic. People parted ways for him, sensing the sudden dangerous shift in the atmosphere. I remained perfectly still, holding my crystal champagne flute, my posture radiating complete authority. As he reached the edge of the VIP section, he did not greet me. He did not apologize. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into my skin through the silk fabric of my red gown. I looked down at his hand, then back up to his face. My voice was dangerously low, entirely devoid of emotion. I told him he had exactly 3 seconds to remove his hand from my body before I shattered the crystal flute across his jaw. Marcus swallowed hard, instantly releasing his grip. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my cheek, smelling of expensive scotch and raw fear. He ordered me to follow him to the private corridor immediately. He said we needed to handle this away from his colleagues. I smiled a chilling, hollow expression and gracefully set my champagne flute on a passing waiter's silver tray. I turned and walked toward the heavy mahogany doors leading to the private restroom corridor, allowing him to follow me. I was not retreating. I was moving the execution to a more intimate setting. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, instantly muffling the classical music and the chatter of the ballroom. The corridor was deserted, lined with ornate mirrors and expensive marble fixtures. The moment we were isolated, Marcus dropped the panicked facade and launched into the aggressive, manipulative tactics he had utilized for our entire marriage. He paced back and forth, running a hand over his perfectly faded haircut, his chest heaving. He turned to me, his voice a harsh, accusatory whisper. He demanded to know if I had completely lost my mind. He asked what kind of vindictive, crazy woman shows up to her husband's corporate event, dressed like a high-class escort just to cause a scene. He was trying to put me on the defensive. He was trying to make me feel small, irrational, and out of control. I stood tall, smoothing the immaculate fabric of my red dress. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my wardrobe. I simply watched him perform. When insulting me did not work, Marcus pivoted to his most reliable weapon. He weaponized our community and our faith. He stepped closer, attempting to tower over me, using his physical size to intimidate. He told me I was making a massive, humiliating mistake. He asked if I had thought about the optics of my behavior. He brought up our congregation. He asked how I thought Pastor Thomas and the church elders would react when they heard that Maya Jackson, the respected high-earning corporate auditor, had a public meltdown at a sophisticated social gathering because she could not keep her husband happy at home. He sneered, his tone dripping with patronizing disgust. He said the community would not pity me. They would laugh at me. They would say I was just another bitter, angry black woman who drove her successful husband into the arms of a younger, softer woman. He told me I was destroying my own pristine reputation just to satisfy a petty, jealous grudge. He ordered me to turn around, walk out the back exit, and go wait for him at our house. He promised that if I left quietly right now, he would come home later tonight, end his foolish little fling with Chloe, and we could go to marriage counseling to fix our broken foundation. He was offering me a lifeline built entirely on lies. He wanted me to shrink, to accept the blame for his infidelity, and to quietly retreat into the shadows so he could maintain his flawless public image. He actually believed that the threat of church gossip and community judgment would be enough to force me into submission. He believed I was still the dutiful, compliant wife who paid his bills and protected his secrets. I let him finish his desperate, pathetic monologue. The silence in the marble corridor stretched out thick and heavy. I looked at the man I had loved for 6 years. I looked at the man whose career I had funded, whose ego I had constantly massaged, and whose lies I had blindly accepted. He looked so small, so weak, so incredibly predictable. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The sharp clicking of my heels echoed loudly against the marble floor, sounding like a judge striking a gavel. I told Marcus that his performance was profoundly boring. I kept my voice smooth, calm, and terrifyingly even. I told him he was deeply mistaken about my motivations. I explained that I did not care about his pathetic generic affair. I did not care about the 28-year-old blonde girl sitting out there in a stolen dress. I told him he could have Chloe. He could have her naive adoration and her fairy light-covered desk. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. The aggressive, manipulative posturing faltered. He asked me what I was talking about. He asked why I was here wearing a revenge dress, if I did not care about the infidelity. I tilted my head, studying him like a fascinating biological specimen under a microscope. I told him that I did not care about the opinions of the church gossips. I did not care what Pastor Thomas thought of my marriage. I told him that the only opinions I cared about right now belonged to the senior agents at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The color vanished from Marcus's face entirely. He took a stumbling step backward, his back hitting the cold marble wall. His eyes widened into vast, terrified circles. I did not give him a chance to recover. I stepped closer, invading his personal space, trapping him against the wall. I dropped my voice into a lethal conspiratorial whisper. I told him I knew about Apex Consulting. Marcus stopped breathing. His chest froze. I systematically dismantled his entire secret reality. I told him I knew that Brad was the registered agent. I told him I knew about the inflated invoices for the military-grade communication servers. I rattled off the exact dollar amounts of the fraudulent markups. I told him I knew about the hidden secondary trust account where the money was laundered. I told him I knew he used the stolen defense funds to buy the $2 million condo in the Navy Yard and the massive diamond ring sitting on Chloe's left hand. I watched his reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. He began to shake. A fine sheen of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. His confident, tailored facade completely disintegrated. He looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner pull the lever. He stammered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. He begged me to lower my voice. He pleaded with me, telling me I did not understand how these government contracts worked. He tried to claim it was just standard procurement logistics, a minor accounting error that he could easily fix if I gave him a few days to balance the ledgers. He reached out his trembling hands, desperately trying to grasp my shoulders. I slapped his hands away with swift, brutal force. The sharp cracking sound of my palm striking his wrist echoed loudly in the corridor. I told him not to insult my intelligence. I reminded him that I am a senior financial auditor for the defense contractor he was actively robbing. I told him I had accessed the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network database. I had traced every single wire transfer, downloaded every fraudulent invoice, and mapped the entire criminal conspiracy, linking his federal authorization codes directly to my sister's husband. Marcus was hyperventilating now. He slid down the wall slightly, his knees buckling under the catastrophic weight of the truth. He begged me. He literally begged me. The smooth, commanding husband who had just tried to intimidate me with church gossip was now weeping in a public restroom corridor. He pleaded with me to think about our family. He begged me to consider what a federal indictment would do to my own sister and my mother. He told me I would destroy our entire bloodline if I turned over that evidence. I looked down at him with absolute disgust. I told him that my family destroyed themselves the second they decided my hard work was an open ATM for their fraudulent schemes. I told him Chantel and Brad had already lost their house this afternoon because I aggressively called in the foreclosure on their mortgage. I told him their accounts were frozen. Marcus choked back a sob. He asked me what I was going to do. I leaned down, my face inches from his. I told him I was not just going to turn him in. I told him I had already forwarded the preliminary summary to the Internal Investigative Division of the FBI on Friday morning. I told him the full comprehensive dossier was scheduled for delivery to their field office on Monday. I told him his career was dead, his freedom was gone, and his entire existence was officially terminated. I straightened my posture, smoothing my red gown one last time. I told him he should probably go back out there and finish his lovely toast to his new bride. I turned my back on my weeping, broken husband. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped back into the vibrant, glittering ballroom, leaving him to suffocate in the dark. I stepped out of the heavy mahogany doors, the muted ambiance of the restroom corridor, giving way to the brilliant, pulsating energy of the grand conservatory. The classical quartet was playing an upbeat tempo now, and the air hummed with the cheerful chatter of defense contractors and corporate elites. I stood near the entrance of the main ballroom, a striking figure in blood-red silk, waiting for the final act of this carefully orchestrated tragedy to commence. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. I glanced at my watch. It was exactly 8:15. Right on cue, the massive double doors at the front of the venue swung open. A flurry of commotion disrupted the elegant flow of the party as a group of people pushed their way past the confused valets and security coordinators. It was my family. They looked completely out of place in the sophisticated environment of the military gala. My mother was leading the charge, wearing a loud, deeply inappropriate floral dress that she usually reserved for Sunday church services. She was clutching her oversized handbag like a shield, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and aggressive entitlement. Right behind her was Chantel, looking frantic and disheveled. Chantel's usual polished influencer aesthetic was completely shattered. Her hair was messy, her makeup was smudged, and she was wearing whatever expensive athleisure she could throw on in a panic. Brad brought up the rear, sweating profusely in a wrinkled polo shirt, his eyes darting around the lavish ballroom with the terrified, cornered look of a man who knows his entire world is collapsing. I had sent the luxury limousine to their house exactly 2 hours ago. I instructed the driver to tell them that Marcus was receiving a major commendation award from the Department of Defense and that Maya requested their immediate presence to share in the family celebration. I knew they would jump at the chance to attend a high-profile corporate event, especially if they thought Marcus was being elevated. They always wanted to bask in his success to proximity wealth. But I also knew the timing of the limousine's arrival was the true catalyst. The driver would have pulled into their pristine cul-de-sac just moments after the legal courier served them the immediate foreclosure notice on their home. They arrived at the venue not to celebrate but to corner Marcus. They were desperate, terrified, and ready to demand the stolen money they needed to save their fraudulent lifestyle. They walked directly into my trap. My mother spotted me standing near the VIP section, her eyes widened, taking in my immaculate appearance and the striking red gown. She zeroed in on me, her high heels clicking loudly against the marble floor as she marched across the ballroom, cutting a disruptive path through the elegant crowd. Chantel and Brad hurried after her, their panic radiating outward like a physical force. "Maya," my mother hissed, grabbing my arm the second she reached me. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into my skin. "What in the Lord's name is going on? What is this place? Where is Marcus?" Before I could answer, Chantel shoved past our mother, getting right in my face. "Did you do this?" she demanded, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Did you call the bank?" "We just got served with a foreclosure notice. They are taking the house, Maya. You have to fix this right now." "Where is Marcus? He owes us money. He has to transfer the funds today." Brad was pacing nervously behind them, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked around the ballroom, his eyes searching frantically for Marcus. He was oblivious to the high-ranking military officials and defense contractors staring at their chaotic entrance. He muttered under his breath about needing to find Marcus to sort out a massive misunderstanding with the bank. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at my family, observing their utter desperation. I gently but firmly removed my mother's hand from my arm. I smoothed the red silk where she had grabbed me. "You all seem very stressed," I said, my voice calm, projecting a terrifying serenity. "I thought you would be happy to be here. This is a very special night for Marcus." "Special night?" My mother snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "Your sister is losing her home. Brad's bank accounts have been frozen. We don't have time for your corporate games, Maya. You need to call the bank and stop this nonsense. You are embarrassing the family." I tilted my head, looking past them toward the center of the ballroom. "I don't think I am the one embarrassing the family tonight, Mother. Why don't you take a look at what we are actually celebrating?" I gestured gracefully toward the massive digital displays flanking the main stage. My mother, Chantel, and Brad turned their heads simultaneously. The screens were cycling through a slideshow of high-resolution engagement photos. There was Marcus, looking dashing and successful, holding a beautiful 28-year-old blonde woman. There was a close-up of Chloe's hand, the stolen 3-carat princess-cut diamond sparkling brilliantly. The text scrolling across the bottom of the screens read, "Celebrating the upcoming nuptials of Chloe Davis and Marcus Carter." The reaction was instantaneous and profoundly satisfying. My mother gasped, a sharp, ragged sound, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She stared at the screens, her eyes darting between Marcus's smiling face and the unfamiliar blonde woman. Brad stopped pacing. He stared at the display, his mouth hanging open, the realization of what was actually happening slowly dawning on him. He understood in that exact second that Marcus had not invited them here to celebrate a promotion. He understood that they had walked into a meticulously planned ambush. But Chantel's reaction was the most telling. She did not gasp in shock. She did not ask who the woman was. She stared at the screen, and I watched the blood drain entirely from her face. She recognized Chloe. She recognized the diamond ring she had helped Marcus select. She realized that her extortion scheme had not just failed, It had imploded spectacularly in a very public venue. "What is this?" my mother demanded, turning back to me, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and indignation. "Who is that woman? Why is Marcus on that screen, Maya? What is going on?" "That is Chloe," I explained patiently, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the ballroom. "She is a procurement assistant at my base, and she is currently planning a lavish winter wedding in Aspen with my husband. Marcus bought her a $2 million condo in the Navy Yard. We are here celebrating their engagement." My mother staggered back a step, genuinely unsteady on her feet. "Engagement. But he is married to you. This is a mistake. It must be a joke. Marcus would never do this to our family." "It is not a joke, Mother," I said coldly. "It is the reality of your perfect son-in-law." The shock was rapidly morphing into a frantic need for damage control. My mother's ingrained instinct to protect the family's image, regardless of the truth, kicked into overdrive. She looked around nervously, noticing the growing number of guests who were staring at our dramatic interaction. She reached for my arm again, her grip desperate. "Maya, we have to leave. Right now," she hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. "We cannot make a scene here. Do you know who these people are? This will ruin us. We will go home and we will deal with Marcus privately. We will handle this within the family. Do not let these people see you like this." She was actually trying to protect him. Even confronted with undeniable proof of his infidelity and public humiliation of me, her primary concern was managing the optics. She wanted to drag me out of the venue, sweep the betrayal under the rug, and handle the crisis privately to avoid any gossip at the church. Chantel grabbed my other arm, her nails digging in sharply. "Mom is right," she demanded, her voice desperate. "We have to go. You cannot do this here. You will destroy everything. We need to leave before Marcus sees us." I looked at my sister, the woman who had helped my husband betray me, the woman who had tried to extort stolen federal funds to pay for a house I had financed. I looked at my mother, the woman who had demanded I shrink my ambition to appease a thief. I looked at Brad, the money launderer, sweating profusely in his wrinkled shirt. They wanted me to retreat. They wanted me to absorb the humiliation silently, to protect the fragile, corrupt illusion of our family. I let out a slow, chilling laugh. I easily broke free from their desperate grips. I smoothed the fabric of my red gown, standing tall and utterly unbothered by their panic. "We are not going anywhere," I announced, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity. "The party is just getting started, and I have a toast to make." I turned away from my horrified family and began walking with deliberate, powerful strides straight toward the main stage, ready to deliver the final, devastating blow. I pulled my arm completely out of my mother's desperate grasp with a sharp, definitive motion. She stumbled forward slightly, her frantic whispers dying in the heavy air between us. Chantel tried to block my path, her eyes wide with a pathetic mixture of terror and pleading, but I simply stepped around her, as if she were nothing more than a piece of misplaced furniture. Brad was paralyzed, sweating profusely, anchored to the marble floor by the crushing realization that his criminal enterprise was actively imploding. I did not look back at them. I set my eyes on the brightly lit stage at the center of the grand ballroom. My blood-red silk gown flared with every deliberate step I took, the fabric snapping like a battle flag. The low hum of the string quartet suddenly faded into an awkward, scratching halt. The musicians realized that the atmosphere in the room had shifted from a joyous celebration to a highly volatile standoff. I moved with absolute purpose. The sea of military contractors, procurement executives, and defense officials naturally parted for me. They stepped aside, their champagne glasses frozen in midair, their conversations dying on their lips. They did not know who I was, but they recognized the terrifying, unyielding authority radiating from my posture. I was a disruption they could not ignore. The heavy silence spread outward like a ripple in a pond, consuming the laughter and the clinking of crystal. I kept my chin high, my shoulders pulled back, and my gaze locked entirely on the empty microphone stand standing on the center of the platform. The camera perspective would shift here, dropping low to the polished marble floor, capturing the sharp rhythmic striking of my designer heels as I closed the distance. From this low angle, I appeared larger than life, a towering figure of vengeance, ascending toward the false throne my husband had built. The bright spotlights from the stage cast long, dramatic shadows behind me, visually sweeping over the confused faces of the wealthy guests. I could hear their hushed whispers spreading like wildfire. They were asking each other who the woman in the red dress was. They were wondering if I was a disgruntled former business partner, a higher-ranking military official, or a jilted lover. None of them could possibly fathom the actual truth. I reached the edge of the VIP seating area where Chloe had been holding court just moments ago. She was still standing there surrounded by her administrative friends, but her triumphant smile had completely vanished. Her brow was deeply furrowed in genuine confusion. She looked at my face, trying to place where she had seen me before. I watched the gears turning slowly in her naive mind. She recognized me as the strict new senior financial auditor who had visited her cubicle, but she could not comprehend why her new boss was crashing her private engagement party looking like an executioner. She took a hesitant step forward, perhaps intending to ask me what I was doing, but the sheer intensity of my expression stopped her dead in her tracks. She shrank back into her circle of friends, clutching her stolen diamond ring to her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the impending storm. I bypassed her entirely and walked straight to the velvet-draped stairs leading up to the main platform. Marcus was standing near the back curtain, completely trapped. He had tried to flee the room earlier, but the sheer density of the crowd and his own paralyzing panic had rooted him to the spot. He looked like a cornered animal. The flawless, charming government consultant had been entirely erased. His custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo now hung awkwardly on his trembling frame. He was sweating heavily, the moisture glistening under the harsh stage lights. He raised his hands in a weak, pathetic gesture of surrender, silently begging me to stop. He mouthed the word please, his lips trembling with absolute terror. I did not offer him a single ounce of mercy. I did not even grant him the dignity of a response. I placed my hand on the polished brass handrail and ascended the stairs with slow, methodical precision. Every step I took was a nail being driven into his coffin. The heavy thud of my heels echoed through the silent ballroom, amplifying the sheer tension in the air. When I reached the top of the platform, I was standing in the exact spot where he had just delivered his fraudulent toast. I was standing in the center of his stolen universe. I turned slowly to face the massive crowd. Hundreds of faces stared up at me, illuminated by the dim, romantic lighting of the conservatory. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. You could hear a pin drop. I reached out and grasped the microphone, pulling it smoothly from its metal stand. The cold, heavy steel felt grounding in my palm. I stood perfectly still for a long, agonizing moment, letting the suspense stretch out until it became physically painful for everyone watching. I looked down at the front row. I saw my mother clutching Chantel's arm, both of them trembling with the terrifying realization that they had completely lost control of me. I saw Brad staring at his phone, likely watching his illicit bank accounts being frozen in real time by the federal authorities I had tipped off. I saw Chloe looking up at me with wide, fearful eyes, finally beginning to understand that the fairy tale she had been sold was rapidly turning into a nightmare. And I saw Marcus standing in the shadows, waiting for the executioner's blade to fall. I raised the microphone to my lips. I did not tap it to test the audio. I knew exactly how to command a room. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the absolute power of the truth burning in my chest. This was the moment I reclaimed my entire identity. This was the moment I shattered the heavy, suffocating chains of the black tax, the toxic familial obligations, and the deceitful marriage that had drained my resources for 6 long years. I let my gaze sweep across the vast, glittering expanse of the ballroom one final time. The faces of the military contractors, the wealthy vendors, and the high-ranking defense officials were all locked entirely onto me, held captive by the sheer magnetic force of my presence. The intricate ice sculptures slowly melted onto the silk tablecloths, and the expensive white orchids seemed to wilt under the intense, crushing gravity of the impending revelation. I stood there, an unyielding pillar of strength, clad in vibrant red silk, representing the harsh, undeniable reality that Marcus had tried so desperately to bury. I was no longer the compliant, quiet wife funding his delusions. I was the harbinger of absolute ruin. I held the microphone closer, the cold metal brushing against my dark red lipstick. I parted my lips, preparing to unleash the devastating financial and legal truth that would tear this entire opulent illusion apart. The countdown had officially ended, and the detonation was inevitable. Every single lie, every stolen dollar, and every toxic manipulation was about to be laid bare before the world. I took one last long, deep breath of the crisp, cool air circulating through the grand venue. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived, and I was completely ready to deliver the absolute final strike. "Good evening to everyone," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted glass ceilings with absolute clarity. "I am Maya Jackson, Senior Financial Auditor for the Department of Defense. I am also the legal wife of the man you are celebrating tonight." The entire ballroom erupted into chaotic gasps and frantic whispers. I did not give them a single second to recover. I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers toward the audiovisual booth. The massive digital screens flanking the stage instantly switched from the romantic engagement photos to a high-resolution scan of my official marriage certificate. It was absolutely indisputable. Chloe let out a piercing shriek. She clutched her chest, her perfect facade shattering into a million terrified pieces. Marcus simply collapsed. His knees hit the polished wood of the stage with a heavy thud. He buried his face in his hands, completely broken, knowing his entire fraudulent existence was now public record. "That beautiful princess cut diamond on Chloe's finger," I continued, my voice smooth and lethal, "was purchased using $50,000 of embezzled military logistics funds. Every floral arrangement in this room, every drop of champagne was paid for by American taxpayers. And as of yesterday morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has received the complete unredacted dossier of his crimes." Total pandemonium swept through the crowd. Defense contractors scrambled backward, trying to put physical distance between themselves and the massive federal indictment I had just dropped in the center of the room. My gaze tracked a sudden frantic movement near the back exit. Chantel and Brad were trying to escape. Brad was shoving people aside, his face slick with a terrified, guilty sweat. Chantel was pulling at his arm, her expensive athleisure wear, making her look utterly ridiculous as she scrambled toward the heavy oak doors. They knew the mention of the FBI meant their money laundering operation was exposed. They wanted to run to hide, to somehow outrun the catastrophic federal storm. "Brad, Chantel, please do not leave so soon," I called out through the microphone, my voice booming across the grand venue. The family reunion has just reached the best part. They froze instantly. The entire ballroom turned to stare at them. The security guards at the door, sensing the shifting dynamic, casually stepped in front of the exit, blocking their only path to freedom. I stepped off the stage and walked straight down the center aisle toward my treacherous blood relatives. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out the crisp, legally binding documents I had secured just hours ago. I stopped 2 feet in front of Brad and my sister. Brad was trembling violently, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. "You thought you could use my credit to fund your fraudulent lifestyle," I said, dropping the microphone to my side so only they and the surrounding guests could hear the raw, unfiltered venom in my voice. "You thought you could extort my husband, launder stolen government funds, and laugh at me while I paid your mortgage." I raised the folded legal documents and threw them directly at Brad's chest. The papers hit him and fluttered to the marble floor, but he was too paralyzed by fear to pick them up. Chantel stared down at the documents, her eyes wide with mounting horror. "That is your official notice of immediate foreclosure." I stated my words, cutting through the air like a scalpel. "I aggressively called in the entire balance of your loan this morning. You do not have 30 days. You do not have a grace period." As of this exact second, you are completely homeless. Your house is gone. Chantel let out a strangled, pathetic sob. Maya, please. She begged, her previous arrogance entirely evaporated. You cannot do this to us. We are family. Where are we supposed to go? You should ask Brad, I replied coldly, though I suspect he will be utilizing federal housing for the next 20 years. Oh, and those hidden secondary trust accounts you used to wash the stolen military funds. My legal team froze them at noon. You have absolutely nothing left. My mother, who had been standing in shocked silence, suddenly broke through the crowd. Her face was contorted with a visceral rage. She could not comprehend that the daughter she had abused and financially exploited for a decade had just dismantled her favorite child. You are a monster, my mother screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated fury. You are a cruel, vindictive demon. How could you do this to your own sister? How could you destroy your family over a little money and a cheating husband? You are tearing our bloodline apart. She raised her hand as if she wanted to strike me, but the sheer, unwavering dominance in my posture stopped her dead in her tracks. I did not flinch. I did not shed a tear. I looked at the woman who had demanded I shrink my ambition to protect a thief. I looked at the mother who had praised a money launderer while tearing down my hard work. You always taught me that family is everything. Mother, I said, my voice dropping into a chilling, razor-sharp whisper that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. You told me that we must always protect our own and that family should always be gathered together to celebrate milestones. I stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look directly into the cold, dead void where my daughterly affection used to be. So I finally listened to you. I continued, my eyes locked onto hers. I brought absolutely everyone together tonight. I brought the military contractors. I brought the procurement executives. And most importantly, I brought the FBI to join our family gathering. I sincerely hope you enjoy the celebration because it is the very last one you will ever attend as a free woman. Right on cue, the shrill, piercing wail of federal sirens shattered the heavy silence of the grand ballroom. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness outside, illuminating the massive glass walls of the conservatory and casting frantic, chaotic shadows across the terrified faces of my family. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance were thrown open with violent force. A team of armed federal agents wearing tactical jackets stormed into the venue, their badges flashing under the elegant chandeliers. The absolute reality of the situation crashed down upon the room with devastating finality. Two agents moved with terrifying speed straight toward the main stage. They hauled Marcus up from his knees. He did not fight them. He did not speak. The charismatic, untouchable government consultant was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, broken shell of a man. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply through the silent crowd. They dragged him away, his custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap costume. On the floor, Brad tried to make a pathetic last-ditch effort to run toward the kitchen exit. He barely made it 5 steps before a federal agent tackled him to the polished marble floor. Brad screamed, crying out for Chantel to call a lawyer, begging anyone to help him. But nobody moved. The military contractors and procurement executives stepped back, utterly disgusted, actively distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the embezzlement ring. Chantel simply stood there, frozen in absolute shock, watching her husband being read his Miranda rights, while her own mother collapsed into a nearby chair, weeping uncontrollably, as the pristine facade of her family was publicly and permanently obliterated. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the stage, sobbing hysterically into her hands, the stolen 3-carat diamond ring slipping loosely on her finger. She had wanted the successful, wealthy provider, and I had successfully delivered the reality of his criminal enterprise right to her feet. Her entire fantasy was dissolved in minutes, leaving her with the undeniable realization that she was nothing more than an accessory to federal treason. I did not stay to watch them being loaded into the federal transport vehicles. I turned my back on the wreckage of my former life. I walked out through the main entrance, my red silk gown flowing smoothly behind me, entirely untouched by the catastrophic storm I had just unleashed. I stepped into the crisp night air, handed my ticket to the trembling valet, and waited for my car. I drove away from the venue, the sound of the sirens fading into the distance, leaving them all to choke on the ashes of their own greed. The camera slowly pulls back, leaving the chaotic memory of that night behind, transitioning smoothly into the warm, dramatic lighting of my present reality. I am sitting on the plush velvet sofa in the center of my luxury penthouse. The city skyline sparkles brilliantly through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. I slowly swirl the dark red wine in my crystal glass, the deep color catching the ambient light of the room. I take a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich flavor settle before I look directly into the camera lens. Many people in our community called me cold-blooded after that night. The church gossips whispered that I was a ruthless, vindictive woman who destroyed her own family over money and pride. They said I was heartless for sending my husband and my brother-in-law to a federal penitentiary. They judged me for allowing my sister to face eviction and leaving my mother to navigate the brutal social fallout completely alone. I do not care about their judgment. When the people who share your blood look at you and see nothing but an automated teller machine, when they weaponize your loyalty to fund their lies, they forfeit the right to your protection. The black tax is a generational curse disguised as familial duty, and I refuse to be a casualty of that toxic tradition. They expected me to shrink to absorb the betrayal and to keep writing the checks to protect the family name. They expected me to be the strong black woman who silently carries the burden of everyone else's failures. I chose a different path. I chose absolute liberation. I chose to prioritize my own financial security and mental peace over their endless manipulation. The sweetest revenge is not screaming in a crowded room or throwing clothes out on the front lawn. The sweetest revenge is allowing the law to execute your enemies while you quietly secure your assets and watch them fall into the traps they built with their own hands. Marcus and Brad were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy and embezzlement. Chantel and my mother lost everything, forced to rebuild their lives from scratch without the safety net of my hard-earned credit score. Meanwhile, I took the ashes of that toxic chapter and used them as the foundation for my new empire. I launched my own independent financial auditing firm, specializing in identifying massive corporate fraud. I turned my greatest betrayal into my most lucrative asset. Today, I dictate my own worth. I surround myself with people who value my brilliance, not just my bank account. I broke the cycle of financial abuse, and I built a fortress that no one can ever breach again. When your blood relatives treat you like a pawn in their deceitful games, you do not owe them your blind forgiveness, and you certainly do not owe them your bright future. You gather your undeniable evidence, you firmly lock down your empire, and you simply let the proper authorities handle the remaining trash. I am Maya Jackson. I survived the absolute ultimate betrayal, and I successfully made sure my betrayers paid the ultimate price. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a highly successful global business to run right now.